The NYSC girls fought, kicking, screaming, struggling against the cold, wet hands that dragged them closer to the water. Aisha clawed at the ground, her nails ripping into the mud. "Somebody, help us!" But no one could hear them. The river had claimed them. The last thing Nkechi saw before the darkness took her was the river goddess herself, rising from the depths, her eyes like endless voids. "You have broken the rule, and now you belong to me." Long ago, in the quiet village of Umuokwe, the Njaba River was a source of life. It flowed through the land, blessing the soil with fertility and quenching the thirst of its people. The villagers worshipped the river, offering sacrifices of yams and kola nuts, believing that the goddess who dwelled beneath its surface watched over them. But then, the betrayal happened. One year, during the festival of offerings, a desperate man named Obika made a fatal mistake. His wife had been barren for years, and in his greed, he sought the river's favor in the darkest way possible by offering a human sacrifice. Under the cover of night, he lured a wandering traveler to the riverbank and took his life, spilling his blood into the water. He believed the goddess would grant him a child, but instead of a blessing, he unleashed a curse. The river, once clear and pure, turned dark. The goddess, enraged by the defilement of her sacred waters, rose from the depths and declared her wrath. "From this night forward, my water shall never be defiled again. Drink from me after the sun sleeps, and you shall join the lost souls beneath my depths." The villagers trembled in fear, and from that night on, no one, not even the bravest hunter, dared to drink from the Njaba River after sunset. Those who did were never seen again. Generations passed, and the curse became legend. The elders told their children, and their children told theirs. The warning was etched into the very fabric of Umuokwe's tradition. But then came the outsiders. Nkechi, Bimpe, and Aisha were 3 NYSC girls posted to Umuokwe for their 1-year service. They had come from the bustling cities where rivers were nothing more than sights to admire. Life in Umuokwe was quiet, too quiet. The village had no major markets, no proper shops. So when they ran out of basic supplies one evening, they had no choice but to travel to the next town. By the time they were returning, the sky had darkened. The forest path was eerie, the wind whispering through the trees. And then they saw it, the Njaba River, glistening under the moonlight, its surface smooth as glass. Nkechi sighed in relief. "Finally, I'm so thirsty. I feel like I'm going to faint." Bimpe wiped her sweaty face. "Same here. Let's drink and rest for a minute before we continue." Aisha hesitated. "Are you sure? I mean, we don't even know if it is clean." Nkechi laughed. "Water is water, and this looks cleaner than whatever we get in the village." They crouched by the riverbank and scooped the water with their hands. It was cold, too cold, but thirst made them ignore the chill. The girls laughed, feeling refreshed. Nkechi splashed some water on her face, sighing. "See? Nothing to worry about." The first sip was refreshing, the second soothing, then the third sip, and the wind stopped. The forest, once alive with the sounds of insects and night birds, fell into a dead silence. Aisha frowned. "Did you feel that?" Nkechi's breathing grew ragged. Her chest tightened. I feel weird." Bimpe clutched her stomach. "Something is not right. My skin feels cold." Then from the river, a ripple spread. Something was waking up. Aisha turned, her eyes wide. "Did you see that?" The river, once still, began to move. The ripples grew, spreading outward as though something beneath the surface was rising. Then the whispers came, soft, eerie voices that twisted through the air, calling around them like invisible fingers.
Who drinks after the sun sleeps?
Nkechi's breath hitched. Who said that? Bimpe stumbled backward. Let's go, now. But it was too late. The girls tried to run, but their legs could not move. Their bodies were rooted to the ground, paralyzed by an unseen force. From the depths of the river, a hand emerged. Pale, boneless fingers, wet and wrinkled, shot out of the water and grabbed Nkechi's ankle. She screamed. The others barely had time to react before more hands, dozens of them, burst from the water. They weren't human. They were the lost souls, those who had defiled the course, those who had been swallowed by the river. Their faces were twisted in agony. Their hollow eyes locked onto the girls. The spirits pulled. The NYSC girls fought, kicking, screaming, struggling against the cold, wet hands that dragged them closer to the water. Aisha clawed at the ground, her nails ripping into the mud. Somebody, help us! But no one could hear them. The river had claimed them. The last thing Nkechi saw before the darkness took her was the river goddess herself, rising from the depths, her eyes like endless voids.
You have broken the rule, and now you belong to me.
The water closed over them, and the night returned to silence. The village of Umuokwe awoke to an eerie stillness. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, as though the earth itself knew something terrible had happened. By morning, the NYSC girls had not returned. Mama Ozioma, the old woman who cooked for them, was the first to notice. She knocked on their huts, expecting to hear their laughter, their usual complaints about the village's lack of modern comforts. But when there were no answer, a shiver ran down her spine. Something was wrong. By noon, the village elders gathered. Their faces were grim, their voices hushed. The girls never came back. Someone whispered. They went to the neighboring town yesterday evening. Another added. Silence. Then, Elder Jide cleared his throat. His voice was heavy with fear. They must have passed the river after dark. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The forbidden river. The warning had been passed down for generations. Never drink from the Njaba River after sunset. But the NYSC girls were outsiders. They didn't know. Now they were gone. A search party was formed immediately. Men armed with cutlasses, hunters with charms wrapped around their wrists, their faces set with grim determination. They followed the forest paths towards the neighboring town, their eyes scanning every corner. Nothing. Then they reached the river bank, and there, in the mud, were footprints. The villagers stopped. Some crossed themselves, others clutched their amulets. This is where they were last seen, one of the hunters murmured. The river looked the same, calm, quiet, undisturbed, but the elders knew better. This river, Elder Jide whispered, it never takes without leaving something behind. Then they saw it, a single NYSC cap, soaked and half buried in the mud. The searchers recoiled. They knew what it meant. The girls had been taken. Whispers from the depths as the men stood frozen in fear. A ripple spread across the river's surface. Then a sound. A whisper. Soft, distant, yet everywhere at once. Help us! The villagers staggered back. The voice was not human. The hunters turned to Elder Jide. What do we do? The old man's face was pale. The river has them now. If we try to take them back, he shook his head. More will be lost. But Mama Ozioma, standing at the back, suddenly screamed, Look! Everyone's eyes darted towards the river. Something was rising from the water. A figure, or what was left of one. Her face was pale. Her eyes hollow. Her hair floating unnaturally around her. The water dripped from her rotting clothes. Her arms reaching forward, as if trying to grab something. It was Bimpe, but it was not Bimpe. Her lips parted, and from her throat came a chilling gulling sound. Don't drink the water. Don't drink the water. Don't drink the water. Then she was gone. Sucked back into the river's depths, the villagers ran. By nightfall, the elders gathered at the shrine. An old man with white chalk markings on his body sat before a flickering flame. "The river goddess is angry," he muttered. "The outsiders have broken the sacred law." "What can we do?" Umuokwe asked, her voice trembling. "Can we bring them back?" The priest sighed. "The river does not let go easily." He threw cowries on the floor, watching how they landed. His frown deepened. "There is only one way," he said. Silence fell over the huts. "The river will return them at a price." Umuokwe clenched her chest. What kind of price?" The priest's eyes darkened. "A life for a life. To bring the NYSC girls back, someone had to take their place." The room grew cold. Outside, the Njaba River churned, and somewhere in its depths, the girls were still, trapped, watching, waiting, drowning in eternal darkness. The air inside the shrine was thick with unease. The flickering flame cast shadows on the walls, making the painted symbols of the gods dance like restless spirits. Umuokwe clutched her wrapper tightly. "A life for a life." Her voice cracked. Whose life?" The chief priest's milky eyes held no mercy. "The river does not choose. We must." A heavy silence settled over the gathering. The villagers shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. "How can we ask someone to die?" Elder Jide finally spoke. "These girls were strangers. They didn't even know the rule. Must they be lost forever?" The priest shook his head. "The river does not care for ignorance. It only knows hunger." Umuokwe turned to the elders. "Then, do we let them drown in the darkness? Do we let their spirits wander, cursed and forgotten?" The priest's cowries still lay scattered on the floor. He stared at them, then sighed deeply. "There may be another way." Heads snapped towards him. "But it is dangerous," he continued. "If we fail, the river will take more than just the girls. It will take whoever dares to challenge its wrath." The priest instructed the villagers to prepare for the ritual of return, a forbidden ceremony that had not been attempted over 100 years. "The river's grip is strong," he warned. "We must weaken it." By nightfall, the villagers gathered at the riverbank. The elders carried white chalk, marking sacred symbols on the ground. The hunters brought a black goat, its eyes wide with fear. The priest stood at the water's edge, his arms raised. "Njaba, great mother of the river, we come not as enemies, but as servants. We seek to return what was lost." The river remained silent. The priest sliced the goat's throat. The blood spilled into the water, dark tendrils spreading through the current. Then the wind shifted. The trees shuddered, and an eerie whisper slittered through the air.
They drank after sunset.
The villagers held their breaths.
They belong to me.
Suddenly, the river exploded into motion. Water shone violently, and the lost souls of the river began to rise. Hands emerged from the depths, rotting fingers, skin like waterlogged paper, faces twisted in eternal suffering, the spirits of those who had defied the river before. Among them were the NYSC girls, Nkechi, Bimpe, Aisha. They stood half submerged in the water, their eyes hollow, their lips moving without sound. Umuokwe screamed, "They are still alive!" The priest did not flinch. "They are not yet dead, but they are not fully among the living either." He took a deep breath and lifted a sacred staff, pounding it into the wet earth. "I call upon the first gods, the old ones who walked this land before the river was cursed. Bring back what was taken. Release them from your grasp." The river shook. The spirits wailed, and suddenly Nkechi gasped for air. Her chest heaved. Her skin, once pale and lifeless, flushed with color. Then Bimpe, then Aisha. The water rejected them, throwing them onto the shore like broken dolls. The villagers rushed forward, wrapping them in cloths, crying tears of relief. But the priest remained still, because the river was not done. A horrifying shriek erupted from the water. The spirit of the river screeched in rage, their forms twisting, their hollow eyes locked onto the priest. The price has not been paid. The villagers did not move. They were frozen in terror as the river goddess rose from the depths. She was tall, her form shifting between water and flesh. Her eyes were black voids, her hair floating like thick tendrils of seaweed. The air around her vibrated with an unnatural force.
You have defied my law,
she hissed, her voice echoing in their bones. The priest stood his ground. Njaba, great mother of the river, we have done as tradition demands. We offer the sacrifice and you return the lost ones. The balance has been restored. The goddess laughed. It was cold, hollow sound.
A life was promised, and yet you think I'll be satisfied with a mere goat.
The villagers gasped. Some turned to run, but the ground shook beneath their feet. The river rose higher, water creeping towards them like living fingers. Then the spirit in the water began to chant.
The debt must be paid. The debt must be paid.
The priest turned to the villagers, his heart heavy. There is only one way, he said. One of us must take their place. Mama Ozoma gasped. No, there must be another way. The priest shook his head. The river has spoken. A cold silence fell over them. No one dared to move, to speak, to offer themselves. Then from the group, a voice broke the silence. I will go. All eyes turned to Chisom, a young hunter, barely in his 20s. His eyes were pale, but his gaze was steady. I will take their place. The villagers cried out in protest. No, you're too young. But the priest stepped forward, placing a hand on Chisom's shoulder. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Chisom nodded. Then without hesitation, he walked towards the river. The goddess smiled.
Come, child.
And so, Chisom stepped into the water. The river swallowed him whole. No struggle, no sound, just silence. The river sleeps again. The moment Chisom disappeared beneath the surface, the wind died, the river stilled, the angry spirits faded. The goddess lowered herself back into the water, her form dissolving into the current.
The debt is paid.
And with that, the curse retreated. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the river returned to its usual quiet state, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Chisom was gone, and the price of breaking the sacred law had been paid in blood. The villagers mourned for Chisom. They built a shrine at the riverbank in his honor, marking the place where he had entered the water. But as for Nkechi, Bimpe, and Aisha, they never spoke of what they saw beneath the river. But at night, when the wind howled through the trees, they sometimes heard whispers in the water. A voice, do not drink after sunset, do not drink after sunset. And deep beneath the water, in the place where no light reached, Chisom's eyes remained open, waiting, because someday the river would call for another. The next morning, Bimpe, Aisha, and Nkechi, they packed their things and left the village and never returned. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, like the video, comment what you have learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more chilling and thrilling stories just like this one. Turn on your notification so you don't miss an upload. See you on the next one. Thank you and stay blessed. Bye.